Can you hear me? Thank you very much. It's always a great pleasure for me to speak with my dear friend Dr. Uday Kulkarni. We must have had few dozen discussions over the past 7-8 years on topics related to Maratha history and about his books. And it was great earlier this morning to meet Vaibhav. We have been interacting on again on Twitter for a long time, but it's always great to meet in person. So I'm really looking forward, like all of you, to hearing from Vaibhav about some of his excellent books and his thoughts on this interesting topic. So let's talk about the topic a little bit. Essentially, we're going to talk about the relevance of and the reliance on history. I think this audience, I'm sure, probably doesn't need any introduction or any explanation for the importance of history. But I think a much broader audience is hopefully going to look at this on YouTube as well. So I'm going to ask my panelists to initially briefly talk about why they think history is important, and secondly, why history needs to be taught the right way. We will get into how history has been taught to us over the past few decades and how that needs to be changed if required, and what are the issues with that. And we will get into a discussion of how history should be written, the fact-based research history, which many people say it's quite boring. Many people end up liking a fiction version of history. Obviously, the Puritans like Dr. Kulkarni, I'm sure, are not going to like that, but there are some advantages to that as well. So we'll get into that discussion. But before we get into that specific discussion, what I want to do is ask both Uday and Vaibhav to briefly talk about their recent books. And both of them have written some very popular books, history biographies. And let's start, Uday, with you. Your recent book, and we have had a discussion about that multiple times as well, about Madhavrao Peshwa, is very interesting. Your entire trilogy of the Peshwa books, starting with Bajirao, Nana Sahib, and now Madhavrao, have been interesting and covered one of the most important eras of Indian history that hasn't been talked about a whole lot, which is the 18th century Maratha Empire. Most people, especially outside of Maharashtra, but quite a few within Maharashtra, don't know the significance of the 18th century Maratha history, because the way traditionally the history has been discussed and taught is we have the 17th century Mughals and then we have the 19th century British, and nothing happens in between, effectively. So, and there's a Plassey, and then there's Marathas lose at Panipat. How they got to Panipat, no one talks about. So, Uday is setting that record straight by talking about how the Maratha Empire was a preeminent empire of the 18th century. And if the English won India from anyone, it's the Marathas and not the Mughals. So Uday, would like to hear your thoughts about your most recent book, but also the trilogy and your focus on the 18th century Maratha history.
Actually, it has always been a feeling I've had that Maratha history has been neglected on the national stage. Considering that this is an empire that ruled from Peshawar to Tanjavur and from the plains of Kumaon to the Kaveri, you find that in the textbooks or in the popular literature which you find in the non-fiction books of the 18th century, there has been either a conscious or unconscious neglect of this period. Now, conscious I feel because there was a Delhi-centric model which was post-independence, and even during the British period which was imposed on us, and that is what that's the history which was taught, and that was it even came into the textbook. So you find suddenly that the Mughal period ends and the British period starts. So while there is 150 years of Maratha history in between, which is completely neglected, because nobody thinks of Pune or Satara as the nerve center of the whole empire. People are only thinking of who comes in Delhi. So a decrepit ruler like Shah Alam is given so much importance by so many popular authors. Now I don't blame them, because most of Maratha history was usually written in Marathi. And most of the Marathi authors were content in writing in Marathi. Now, all the Marathi sources of history are in Marathi again, and never been translated into English. So these people did not really have any access to them, nor did they have collaborators in the Marathi, speaking Marathi, who could tell them what is written there, except for a few exceptions like Yadunath Sarkar, who had a ongoing liaison with Riyasat Karsar Desai. So you always find that people kind of tiptoe around Maratha history. They don't really take it by the horns, and therefore you find that it is neglected. And the general consciousness is that, oh, Maratha history, what is that? I mean, the first book when I wrote Panipat, I got a call from a brigadier who had served 35 years. I keep telling the story. 35 years in the Maratha light infantry, and he said that till I read your book, I didn't know the Marathas came to Panipat. Because how many textbooks mention that it was the bloodiest battle of the 18th century? How many
In the whole world.
in the whole world in that. So this is so even now, right now, we are in the middle of framing the CBSE syllabus again, and the first pre-draft syllabus which came to me, I found that the Marathas are not mentioned anywhere. Shivaji Maharaj is not mentioned anywhere. So I have written 3 notes to the person in charge of that this will not do, and you have to kind of redo the syllabus. I just hope that it works, because by end of this month that syllabus is going to be finalized, and I just hope that all these points are taken on board.
Thanks for clarifying this. But Vaibhav, yeah, I think let's would like to hear your thoughts. Then we'll come back to the Madhavrao book. But same question to you. You know, what's your sense of how history is being covered, and especially sitting here in Pune, you're from Mumbai, the Maratha history. What's your view on that? Because you have done some great contribution in that area.
So I will get into this by mentioning my latest book on Shivaji Maharaj. When I wrote that book, the reaction in several parts of Maharashtra, including Mumbai, was, why are you writing about Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj? And the reaction that I got outside Maharashtra, in places like Delhi, Madras, Calcutta, or wherever else it may be, was that why wasn't such a book available for us earlier? The reason for that question is that the earlier biographies of Shivaji Maharaj that we have are at least 100 years old. Jadunath Sarkar's work, before that Dennis Kincaid's work, Dr. Kulkarni mentioned Riyasatkar Sardesai, his 3-volume history of the Marathas, and 8-volume Marathi, Riyasat. But a lot of the stuff in those works, including those of Sarkar and Sardesai, is already outdated. And new material has been discovered in the last 100 years. Like Dr. Kulkarni, I know, has brought so much of material to light. So similarly, my book, I think I can claim, has brought plenty of new material to light and presented that material in a manner that is readable and accessible to 21st century readers. The idea is not to write history only for a group of historians reading in their libraries in some academic institutions. I certainly want them to read my books, but I want everybody to read history, and that is the whole idea. For example, even when we discuss Shivaji Maharaj in Maharashtra, what do we discuss? We have placed him in a very narrow and limited framework. And that is where I agree with Dr. Kulkarni, that we ourselves are responsible when he said that the Maharashtrian writers kept Maratha history confined to the Marathi books. So similarly, we have kept Shivaji Maharaj confined to Maharashtra. Just a few days ago, a new biopic of Napoleon came out, and entire libraries are filled with works on Napoleon, on so many other heroes. But unfortunately, Shivaji Maharaj has not got his due nationally and internationally. And I think we need to work towards that, towards giving him his due. Just to give an example, when I said Jadunath Sarkar's work is full of errors, riddled with errors. An example that we all have come to believe and have been brought up to believe from childhood, that Shivaji Maharaj named Kondana as Sinhagad after Tanaji Malusare died, after his ultimate sacrifice, and Shivaji Maharaj was moved and he renamed the fort as Sinhagad, whereas Shivaji Maharaj's own correspondence makes it very clear that Kondana's other name was Sinhagad. There are letters from Shivaji Maharaj which show that. Now, I am certainly not the first to bring this to light, but what has happened is that because, and I say this with the highest respect for Gajanan Bhaskar Mehndare and others, is that historians have been talking to other historians, and that is what we need to stop doing. So I think the more history goes out to people, the more we need, the better it is, and we need to reach out to people. We need to tell stories, but not the same kind of stories in the same outdated fashion, but in a way that is accessible to the 21st century reader, and also truthful history. That's extremely important.
So, Thanks for the overview. Both you and Dr. Kulkarni have done an amazing job of bringing this history in English and essentially making it accessible to all of the people outside of Maharashtra and outside of India as well. Now, one thing that I want to come back to is we keep saying that yes, partially we can say that Marathi people are responsible. We didn't come up with that much content in English or in other languages, but if you go back even pre-independence, recently, I don't know if you've seen this, but on Twitter, there was a paper from one of the exams from 1928 that has circulated. It's a history exam in British India. And there's no reference of any Maratha history. It's Indian history, but it talks about Mughals. So the British were also doing this. It's not just that we haven't fixed it. So what's your sense? And I'm going to come back to you as well with that question. Were the British just too Delhi-centric, or there were some other ulterior motives, like they were worried about the Marathas in 1818 and then again in 1857? Did they have some great master plan to, keep history Delhi-centric, or was it just an oversight or...
No, the British master plan was laid out very nicely by Macaulay. That crush Indians' self-confidence to the extent that they are Indian only in appearance, but English in body, mind and spirit. And that is the policy that the British followed. Now, when I said that the Maharashtrians are responsible, I did not mean that Maharashtrians alone are responsible. But we could have done a lot more. I think that is the sense that Dr. Kulkarni is also conveying. It's not, and he also said, and it's something I agree with, that history writing in India has been north-centric, and the south has been ignored. And unfortunately, we are in Western India, so we are neither in a way in the south nor are we in the north. So where do we fall? Also, if you look at the intellectual establishment and the control of intellectual institutions and the historical establishment in India, Maharashtrians have not really been in that position to control that establishment for the past 100 years. Now, Bengal could also have been ignored, but because Bengali historians were in the forefront of writing all the time about their region, and they controlled these establishments as well, they had these twin advantages, and they wrote rigorously about their history. Now, this is where I think we have had our shortcomings. We could have also done that. Even though we did not have the second advantage of being in control of institutions, we could still have gone out and written a lot more. Anyway, we are doing that. That reparation work is right now ongoing. But it is a peculiar Indian thing that the establishment has been controlled by a certain set of people. They have largely chosen to focus on the north. Most of them have forgotten Western India altogether, despite the fact that not only is Maratha history so critical to understanding Indian history, and particularly early modern Indian history, we have an entire new generation across India. And I get this question from people across India, that suddenly we are finding out that the Indian map shows this big Maratha empire, and we don't know that such an empire existed. So when did it exist, and what happened to it? Now suddenly people are realizing, and there is an increasing amount of curiosity that's happening, and that I feel is a positive development. And we can talk endlessly about what has happened in the past, but this is a good opportunity for us to make amends and ensure that history is told in an impartial and fair manner, and that Maratha history, just as much as Rajput history or Delhi's history or southern history, is written adequately about.
I think both of you are doing a great job in fixing that. Uday, coming back to you with the same question, and this is something that we have briefly talked about a while back, but did the British, and you have referenced even in that famous 1897 correspondence after the Zafekar brothers had assassinated Commissioner Rand, about what they're thinking, the British intelligentsia thinking about the Marathas were. And again, it goes back to 1818 and 1857. So did the British take a conscious view of, completely demoting Maratha history, and as Vaibhav said, the Macaulay principle of essentially, crushing the self-respect, self-belief, or was it an oversight? And And what happened after 1947? Why didn't we fix it? Why did it take for people like two of you to fix it?
I think it's a very huge project actually to regain for Maratha history the place that it deserves. But if you look at the late 18th century, there are letters written by Charles Mallet when he says the final confrontation that we are going to have in this country is with the Marathas. And after that,
This is Charles Mallet was the resident at the Peshwa court from the East India Company. So think of it this way, just a quick clarification. This is around 1790s when the British and the Marathas were, to use today's word, frenemies. So they were, cooperating. And the biggest embassy that the British had anywhere in India was in Pune, right here 2 kilometers away by the Sangam, which is today the Judge Bungalow. So just an FYI.
so right from that point in time, there's a conscious fear that these are the people who could pose a threat to them once again. And after 1803, you find that Marathas did not have any generals, except in 1818 when the last two generals were Bapu Gokhale and Trimbakji Dengre. But they did not produce any more generals because after the subsidiary treaty, you are not allowed to maintain an army. But repeatedly, after 1818, what was the first thing they did is they destroyed all the forts because they could be places of refuge for anybody who rebels against you. After 1857, once again, they used their cannons to blast these these forts are built of basalt rock. It's not easy to demolish them, but they blasted them. And there are plenty of documents available to substantiate this. There's, for example, the fort of Miraz, which the Marathas took 1 month to capture when they were fighting amongst themselves. And that fort, Madras sappers come to Miraz, tell the king that this is the picture of the fort. These are the bastions we are going to destroy, so that the fort becomes innocuous after that. So there are pictures of which bastion has to be destroyed, which gates have to be destroyed, and so on. So this fear of the Marathas continued. When the revolutionaries started acting over here, before the Congress party and their politics, the revolutionaries began. So like the Adi Kranti Karak, as Umaji Naik was before that, then Vasudeva Balavan Phadke was there, and then Safekar brothers, who 1897, the Jubilee murders in the present Pune University campus. After Jubilee murders, you find an author called G.W. Stevens writing a book called In India, where he says that we are the people, for all other provinces in India, it was only a change of masters. Once the Mughals were ruling, then the Marathas were ruling, and the English started ruling. But they were used to being subservient to another master. While here, we reduce them from masters to slaves. And the Marathas feel this hurt more than the others. So this is the 1899 book, it's a big page full of, I could have brought that quotation today.
Interesting. This is 80 years after 1818. So and it's 3 generations, but that memory was still fresh.
In 1818, when the last Peshwa he fought his third Anglo-Maratha war, which he need not have, and he could have enjoyed his Jagir like all the other Sardars of the Maratha Confederacy did. He fought that war for whatever it was worth, and he was defeated because there was no Senapati. The technique of war was lost. They had far better armaments. So it was a foregone conclusion. He kept appealing to the Bhosles, to the Shindes, to the Holkars to please join in. And all of them remained glued to their own personal interests rather than fighting the Third Anglo-Maratha War. So when the Peshwa was defeated in that, he was forced to be deported out of the Deccan because they were scared that if he stays here, again something will come up. Not only that, few years after that, they allowed the Shanwara Vada for 7 days to be burnt down. To reduce the prestige of the Shanwara Vada, they not only built a lunatic asylum inside immediately after the 1818, but they established a Sabji Mandi where the procession of the Peshwas would take place. So the Maruti Mandir in that place, courtyard of the Shanwara Vada, even today is called Batatya Maruti because it was a bazaar for selling potatoes. So at every opportunity they tried to bring down the Maratha nerve center, bring down its procedure, splitting of them amongst each other. Like the Chhatrapati and the Peshwa were fighting the third Anglo-Maratha war together. Actually Chhatrapati was with him. At Ashti, when they fought one of the battles of the third Anglo-Maratha war, the Chhatrapati was separated from the Peshwa. He fell into the hands of the English, and he was forced to give a proclamation that this Peshwa has been removed from his post of Prime Minister, and thereafter Bajirao was no longer the Pandit Pradhan. He just became Bajirao fighting with the English, which he continued fighting for another 3 months. So at every opportunity, it was the Marathas that they really feared at that time, and therefore there was a conscious effort to, And after 1920, I would say the independence movement, which was centered around Tilak and Gokhale in Pune, it moved out of Pune. And since then, you find, as far as on the national stage, Pune has seen a steady decline. Now you asked me about after 1947 what happened. You just have to see the first 5 education ministers of India, whom I will not name. And you can see why the educational syllabus that we have today is what it is. And that explains more or less everything. And that is where this left liberal educational system has entered our history and changed the whatever our students and our children and we learnt about Indian history has emanated from that kind of, I would say it's definitely a left liberal conspiracy from the center, and everything was shifted to a Delhi centric model.
I think you have summarized it nicely and bluntly, and I think this is something that in retrospect should have been fixed a long time back, but better late than never. So again, once again, thanks to both of you for doing your important part. Your book on Panipat, I think so many people, the first book that you started after, when you started this new career after your naval and medical career, so many people reached out to you, reached out to me as well when we were discussing your book about how, Panipat was this one line loss, and the build up and what happened and why, and people had absolutely no clue about what, and to Vaibhav's point some time back, right? How did that map suddenly appear and why did it shrink, and the whole basis of that?
I would put it very simply, that had the Marathas not fought at Panipat, there are a lot of people say, but why did they just not wait it out? Abdali would have returned back to his homeland one day, then they could have gone back and taken Delhi. Now that was done by Raghunath Rao 4 years in 1757-58. He didn't confront Abdali. Abdali came back in 1760. Now Sadashiv Rao was a different kind of a person generally. He was not the type who was going to shirk from a battle. And because of omissions by the Marathas in the previous 20 years, for some reason there was a tiff with the Rajputs about paying tributes. There was a tiff with Shuja-ud-Dawla because his father was driven out of Delhi with Maratha arms. The Rohilas were always against the Marathas. So it was very difficult for them to get any allies. When the Jats joined the Marathas, they demanded that Delhi be handed over to them as a price of their support, which Sadashiv Rao was not prepared to do. So they also left him. And if you look at the trajectory of the way the Panipat campaign was conducted, till the first week of December, the Marathas were on par with the Afghan forces over there. But they never expected that the Afghans will not attack. I mean, their position was such that had the Afghans attacked them with their guns, they would have blasted them. Now, if you compare this with the Battle of 1526 between Babur and Ibrahim Khan Lodi was in the place where Abdali was. And Babur was the invader, but he was entrenched. Now, Ibrahim Khan Lodi made the mistake of attacking Babur's entrenched position and lost the battle. This time, Abdali did not make the mistake. He told his other officers, you let me conduct the battle the way I want it. Don't interfere in these matters. And he waited out. He gradually starved the Marathas because look at the map of that time. The Rohilas were north of the Jamuna. Shuja-ud-Dawla was north of the Jamuna. So all the supplies which Abdali was getting were very close by. Well, the Marathas were surrounded by enemies. They were in enemy territory. And the longer this dragged on, the more chance of their being starved out. I would say in spite of that starving out, to have given a battle that they came within an inch of victory, that Abdali says that the Marathas have almost reached my camp, because he was the back of his army, and he would put his ladies on the fast camels and horses so they can be whisked away if the Marathas reach them. It was that situation which they had reached till almost noon or 1 p.m. in the afternoon. So you can see that with that kind of army, they could achieve that much, and who knows what would have happened had things been little
I think
different.
history is full of what ifs. I mean, this is something that we keep talking about. What if Panipat, which came so close to swinging one way or the other. And for those interested in history and fiction and literature, there's a very nice short story about 70-80 pages written by none other than Dr. Jayant Naralkar about it's a story about two parallel universes, but he takes an example of Panipat, where in one version of the universe, which is what we know, the bullet hits Vishwasrao and he dies, and then we know what happened with the battle. But in the parallel universe, the bullet misses, the Marathas win, and how the entire history of India over the next 250 years changes. it's a fascinating book. It's a short story. It's available.
He discusses this man going in the train to
Yeah.
Bombay.
So, and there's a lot of
customs post before entering Bombay.
So his
because he's
description-
entering the British territory.
Correct. So it's basically India is with the Indians and only Mumbai, small part of Mumbai. But anyway, so do read that, Google it, and you'll find that. Just do Jayan Narlikar and Panipat, and I think you'll find that. The other what ifs of history that you just mentioned, I always like to talk about is, had 1818 not happened, I mean, had anyway Bajirao II had subsidiary alliance, had he not fought the Third Anglo-Maratha War, it's entirely possible that like we have, Gwalior, Indore, Hyderabad, Pune would probably have been the biggest princely state. Because at that time, that was the biggest princely state if there was. So had he not fought that war and made the pact like all the other regions did. So, history, I mean, Pune could have been a completely different place. May not have been that great, because then we may not have seen the likes of, Tilak, Agarkar, Savarkar. And I'm going to come to you, Savarkar, about your book as well. So, there's a lot of what ifs. But Vaibhav, before we get to the Savarkar book as well, I want to talk about your excellent current book about Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. We were talking about it yesterday as well, that, even in Maharashtra, most people, their knowledge of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj is very episode based. Everyone talks about Afzal Khan, then they talk about Agra Hun Sutka, then they talk about Rajyabhishek. These 3-4 things, Surat. So, but even here, and forget outside of Maharashtra, which is an even bigger problem, people don't have a very good view of this great leader, one of the greatest leaders that India has ever produced, of his vision, his value system, his core strengths, his capabilities, his skills. Those don't come out. So I know it's a hard ask, but can you talk about some of those and summarize them? And of course, people need to read your book for understanding this more.
Yeah, no, so it's a huge subject, as you mentioned, and I would like to mention two specific aspects. So one is his decision at the age of 16 to bring out his royal insignia in Sanskrit instead of Persian, when his parents' insignia was also in Persian. So that is a dramatic departure from the norm in the Persianate age, when Sanskrit was on the verge of being wiped out, and when even Hindu Rajas in the south were using Persian, his own parents were using Persian, the officials were using Persian. Marathi and Devanagari and Sanskrit had been relegated to the background as secondary languages or tertiary or maybe non-existent languages. So there was an attempt to wipe out culture and civilization, and at the age of 16 he makes a statement that I will not allow my culture to be trampled upon. I respect your culture, I respect all faiths, I respect all religions, and that is something he demonstrated by way of his actions. And even Khafi Khan and others have written about how he respected the Islamic faith, the Islamic holy book, Islamic holy saints, women and children. But if somebody assaulted his faith and sought to trample upon his faith and culture and civilization, then he was not going to tolerate it, and he was going to ensure that he pushed back against it. And that pushback began at the age of 16, when Bijapur was also turning extremely fanatical, because Bijapur had just sent out a directive saying that Hindus should not get top positions in the administration, Muslims should not participate in Hindu festivals. There are written directives from that time from Bijapur. And then Aurangzeb was anyway ready to take control, and then once he takes control, he turns completely fanatical, more and more fanatical as the years go by. So that is his early assertion at the age of 16. I feel that assertion in the form of the royal insignia being in Sanskrit is much more important than the Torna story, or the one that which is why your point about us restricting ourselves to
events,
certain episodes.
Capture this fort, capture this.
Torna Ghetla. And our politicians have also helped the cause of limiting him. Karan bota kapli, kothara kadla, and nowadays you see it on television every day, because it's so they have actually made a mockery of him. So actually it is showing a lot of, and these are the people who talk about respect for Shivaji Maharaj. I think this shows the greatest disrespect for him. This kind of mockery that's going on right now, and has been going on for many years now. So that is one point. The second is we need to talk about him as the creator of the larger Indian Navy. Now, Dr. Kulkarni is from the Navy himself. He spent 14 years at least in the Navy. But his vision of the Navy, here is a man who comes from the Deccan, he's away from the sea. People often say, what about the Cholas? Of course, the Cholas were great. There is no denying the greatness of the Cholas. But one thing I'm surprised by is suddenly people remembered the greatness of the Cholas when the Prime Minister decided to dedicate the naval emblem to Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. All these years the Cholas had been invisibilized, but nobody saw them. Now suddenly everybody's realized their greatness. But Shivaji Maharaj at the age of 28 and 29 starts his naval activities in Kalyan, Bhivandi and Thane ports outside of Mumbai, just to the north of Mumbai. Starts building his naval fleet when he has absolutely nothing. And the Marathas have absolutely zero knowledge of building any sort of naval fleet. He starts borrowing technology from the Portuguese. He starts employing Portuguese people who are experts in building the naval ships, vessels. He builds a variety of vessels, and there are mentions in the British and the Portuguese records about how their workers have gone over to his side, and the officials are explaining that no, he is paying much more to our engineers. That's why they've gone over to his side. So he has the vision to realize that okay, I need to pay them more because we need the navy. So he has for 400 years after the disappearance of the Chola kingdom, nobody in India, in this vast land, had the ability and vision to understand the significance of the sea in terms of both defense and trade, which he does and starts building. And he travels from the mountains to the sea. See, the Cholas have an inbuilt awareness of the waters because the origins of their kingdom are in a river valley. Shivaji Maharaj is not like that. He is traveling outside towards the sea. But slowly he goes outside. Ultimately he builds more than 50 combat vessels. By the time he is coronated in 1674, he's got more than 50 combat vessels which have been built. He also gets the indigenous people like the Kodis, Ramoshis and others to gradually learn that technology. And anybody will tell you that these things take a lot of time to build. But look at the leap of imagination that he's got. And I don't think we have even bothered to look into these aspects. And I think it's high time we did. It's high time we also explained why he's the father of the Navy, and this whole differentiation that people are making, Cholas and all of that. Yeah. So let us also go out and talk to people about it. I've written in detail about this in my book.
No, I think that's one part I have read through, and I think. And again, thanks for highlighting this part, because there's just so many things that Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj can be credited with, whether it's the administration, whether it's the guerrilla strategy, whether it's the navy, whether it's how he dealt firmly, forcefully with his enemies. I mean, it's something that has not been talked about at all, and I think it's good time that people like you are bringing this. This discussion, I think we can go for another half an hour if you want, but I've been told that we have to take about 5 to 10 minutes for questions. So let me see if there are any questions. Otherwise, I'll have 1 or 2 concluding questions in the end as well. Do we have a mic for the questions, or people just shout out? I think there is one question over there.
Got it. Thank you very much for organizing such a wonderful team, including the young intellectual and the old one also. So it seems a very solid team, and we got to throw new insights into the history. There are certain things that was pinpointing my mind. The first is, we're talking about the history which was fictionalized. So my concern is, day by day, the line between the history and fiction is almost blurred. And I'm very happy that you raised those issues also. One more thing is that about Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, that the fleet and all the things. But I think somewhat our orthodox religion.
Yeah, can you please ask a question to the point, because we have to take more questions as well.
Okay.
Yeah.
The only question is, how can we divide the line between fiction and history?
Yes, I think that's an important question.
Yeah.
Actually, the book that is published by anybody, whether it's fiction or non-fiction, it's the readership which decides what they want to read. And while Kadambari will always be very entertaining, it will not be the truth. The example he gave about Sivamogad is an example of that. That people identify that the name Sivamogad was given because of the death of Tanaji Malusre while taking that, which is not the case. When the novel by Harinarayan Apte says Gad Alap and Sivamogela, the whole world starts thinking that Sivamogad name came with that. So that is one very big flaw in historical fiction, that it gives the wrong ideas. Serials even more so, because the amount of poetic license that I don't know whether it should call it poetic or something else, but they really completely are distorting history as it really is. Somebody has to write the non-fiction parts of history, and somebody has to patronize the people who are writing it. So I'm stating my own case that please buy my books, but that is what it is. I mean, if people buy books which are based on references, each book is a thesis actually. If you see the number of references given at the end of the book, all the statements made there are substantiated by the references given at the end. Now my last book on Madhav Rao has got more than 1300 references in the index. So if somebody wants to challenge a statement made in that, he has to go back and see this original reference. Either it's a contemporary letter or a Bakhar at the most, which is quoted there. So this is the only way the real history goes across. Now the third part of this comes in the skill in presenting it in the manner that this non-fiction real history becomes interesting enough for the readers. So how the book's quality of the book. Suppose you have a miserably printed book with white paper, the back of the printing seen on this side, a dirty glossy covered book. The publisher is very happy to print it because he prints it in 40 rupees and sells it for 500 rupees. But if you want people to read your books, they must be of certain quality. So the publishers are so busy making money that they are not bothered about the quality of the books. All these things have to be considered when you really see why a particular kind of brand of history is going to the people and the real history is not going. And of course our textbooks, which are miserable, which don't give the real story at all. Like for example, we are still stuck to the ancient history ends with the year 1206. Why? Because Kutubuddin Aibak came that time, Delhi centric. When does the medieval period, when the early modern period start? 1526, because Babur came to Delhi at that time. When does the modern period start? 1757, because the Battle of Plassey was won that. Insignificant battle. If the Battle of Plassey was not backed up by the Battle of Buxar 7 years later, what was the Battle of Plassey all about? Nothing. So I have in fact proposed in the new CBSE people that ancient history must end at the Battle of Tarauri when Prithviraj Chauhan was defeated by Ghori. And the modern period, medieval period must end when Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj was coronated in 1674. And modern period, early modern period should start there. And the late modern period should start in 1818 when the British completely took over from the Marathas. So this division is required because we have to be India-centric. You can't import things from somewhere else, which was laid down by some Indian History Congress, which incidentally was founded in Pune in 1936, before it has been completely taken over by the Aligarh Muslim University.
A quick point on the fictional history, since you're from the birthplace of all these serials.
No, I want to make a quick point. That is that now a lot of correction is happening already, and I completely endorse Dr. Kulkarni's views that please buy well-researched books. That includes my books as well. So, but just to make a quick point, now there is a lot of correction happening. A lot of necessary things are going on now, and many personalities have been ignored earlier. Important people have been ignored earlier. But what I want to say is that even when you are making correction, there is the risk of overcorrection. By what I mean by the risk of overcorrection is, I'll give an example of that. I've written a biography of Savarkar's, and last year Rajnath Singh said at a function that Savarkar had written his letters to the British government, his mercy petitions, because Gandhiji had asked him to. And then several historians who did not want to contradict Rajnath Singh because he represents a government that they love, said that yes, he is right. Gandhiji had asked him to write, so Savarkar wrote. But there it is your duty as a writer and a historian to point out that no, Rajnath Singh, what Rajnath Singh said, I respect him as the Defence Minister of India, but it's a mistake. Savarkar did not write his letters because Gandhi asked him to do that. Savarkar wrote on his own. And there is absolutely nothing wrong in Savarkar writing those letters in the first place. Those who think that it is wrong to have written those letters have absolutely zero understanding of what it means to be in prison. They have never faced a lathi charge. Forget about facing conditions of severe torture.
Forget Kalapani.
In a hellhole like Kalapani. You know, so they have zero understanding. We can ignore those people. And they keep on revealing their lack of understanding and lack of maturity. Let them do that. But that does not mean that, you know, even if somebody is making an erroneous statement, tomorrow I may make an erroneous statement, you may make it, any one of us can make it. We are all human. So it is our duty to say that, otherwise then fiction again takes over, you see.
Thanks. I think we just have about a minute left. Very short question in 10 seconds.
Okay. My name is Sandesh Sawant. The thing is, in the past, I mean, when we were talking about the Mughal times to the British, generally victors wrote history. I mean, that's been happening all over the world. And now I'm glad to know that you all are correcting it. But how do we actually put it into the history books, the real history books, which all Indians are learning, you know, which you all are doing, but these are books. But I think it should be part of the curriculum, like you said, CBSE or whatever.
So short answer, I think Uday already talked about it.
Curriculum is made by committees. And the committees are packed by people who have either a different kind of interpretation or have no knowledge about it.
But will they implement it? Because somebody has to force them.
That remains to be seen.
But somebody has to force them, no?
That remains to be seen.
I mean, Dr. Kulkarni is, in his own way, is trying to push the process. But again, it depends on how things work in the government and in Delhi. So we'll see. I think we have less than 15 seconds. I think I'm going to summarize. You can have... we have another 5 minutes. Okay, well, one question there then. And then I'll summarize. Uday, I think, this is again more of a Bengal thing, which myth has been corrected to a large extent, but it still exists in some quarters.
There are two things which every person who wants to nitpick will point out to you. One is the Bengal episode. There's one document called the Maharashtra Purana written by one contemporary author who describes Maratha atrocities. None of them come anywhere close to the minarets of cut heads raised by Babur or Akbar or Abdali or Nadir Shah. But though people like Yaduna Sarkar say that they were great generals, one of the greatest Asian generals of his time, that's how they are described. Well, the Marathas, their policy was very simple. When they fight with the enemy, they followed the scorched earth policy, which is even today part of contemporary international warfare. The enemy should not get his supplies. In the process, they used to burn the granaries of that village, and therefore the enemy, there's a proper, this thing about Ali Vardi Khan getting trapped at such a situation, because he was the Nawab, he was the usurper actually. He usurped it from the descendants of Murshid Quli Khan and took over Bengal. So the Marathas came into the picture. Actually the Bhosles of Nagpur were there, and one of the chief lieutenants who carried out most of the raids later on was Mir Habib, rather than Raghuji Bhosle himself going there. So their entire thing was strangulate the enemy army so that they don't get supplies. So that was the principle. In the process, what you are seeing in Gaza today, on a much greater scale, you have to strangle the enemy supplies. The villages are providing them, the Banjaras are providing them. Bajirao did the same thing at Palkhed. He made sure the Banjaras ran away, the supplies were dried up to the Nizam, and the Nizam had to surrender. And actually the Nizam's army, hardly anybody was killed. He was cut off from food and water, and therefore he had to surrender. Same thing he did in 1738 when he again defeated the Nizam at Bhopal, where he had plenty of water from the lake there, but he had no food. Again he was surrounded and food was cut off. So these are all policies of the method of waging a war. And of course, the second famous story told is about the Sringeri Mutt attack, about which I have written an article about what is the actual state of affairs, what happened in Sringeri.
Tipu Sultan is in news again, so it's good you brought that
So
up.
that article is there on the net. You can see it. What exactly happened at Sringeri in April 1791. It's titled like that.
I'm going to wrap up. You can ask the question after. Should we take one more? Okay, please.
So
last.
you
Yeah.
mentioned a parallel universe story, a short story of Panipat. So what's the title of the story?
I don't remember the title. Just Google Jain Naralikar and Panipat. You'll get it as the first hit.
Gangadhar Pantanza Panipat.
Acha.
That is a short story within a book which has got plenty of short stories.
Yeah, it's a book on short stories by Jain Naralikar. So I'm going to wrap this up. I think this conversation can go for another hour. Uday and I have had these conversations so many times, and it's never boring. It's always fascinating. All of them must be at least 24 are on YouTube. So if you just Google Uday Kulkarni and my name, you'll find conversations from last at least 10 years probably. And finally, I'm very happy that I could get to speak with Vaibhav. We've been planning to meet for a long time, and somehow it had not happened. Now I hope to meet more often and continue the discussion, because he's written, Dr. Kulkarni has covered most of the 18th century. His next book is going to be about Raghova Dada, which is going to be quite fascinating. And Vaibhav has written books about 5 amazing and interesting personalities. One you can call him a villain, Hitler, but he's also written about, starting with Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj, he's written about Sachin Tendulkar, he's written about Veer Savarkar, and of course Balasaheb Thackeray, his first book, for which he's so well known. So, Vaibhav, I'll give you the last word. What's your next book?
It's a book that will hopefully throw light on another majorly neglected chapter of Indian history. Well, I'll talk about it perhaps next time if I'm invited
Good.
here.
I think
I'll be very happy to talk about it.
That's a very good teaser. I think we will all stay tuned to your Twitter feed to see if we can get any more nuggets on this. Thank you once again. Thank you, Dr. Kulkarni. Thank you, Vaibhav, and thank you, Pune Lit Festival, Manjiri, and the entire team for inviting us. Thank you.